Hey folks! In the vast chaos of Eurogen productions, I recently discovered a particular one that I felt the need to play so I could tell you about it. Psychotoxic, released in 2004. This game is very strange and utterly messy, and has a particular story behind its production, or rather, a story of development hell caused by dishonest publishers, and great determination of its authors in the face of adversities, that makes it very noteworthy. I originally discovered this game while scrolling myabandonware.com, and through this comment I was able to view the video titled "The Craziest Game Ever Made" by the X. It's very well made. Well, at the time I just watched the glimpses of it, and soon decided I had to play it blind. And not only that, I actually decided I had to own a physical copy too. And here it is, the American release. I'm proud of it, and it's not the only piece of Eurogen I've gotten lately. Remember the Slovenian RPG Mistmare? Recently the game director himself discovered my review and even thanked me for making it. I felt honored. Anyway, Psychotoxic is a game known for being a technical disaster, and in fact, the first obstacle to overcome is to make it run on modern systems. Believe me, I tried everything, but somehow there was always a problem which affected the experience, like the flickering cutscenes that almost caused me epileptic seizures. I even tried to install Windows XP on virtual machines, but other problems showed up. But then, when all hope was lost, I stumbled upon this video that directed me to this version with some fixes made by some Russian dude. You have all my warmly thanks. So, after some adjustments, I could finally play this game without compatibility issues and just had to renounce the subtitles. It has been one of the weirdest and jankiest experiences in years. In Psychotoxic we play as the bewitching goth girl Angela Prophet, or just Angie for friends. The game starts on December 19th, 2022, close to Christmas, which is always the best period for bad shit to happen. The story opens with Angie resting at her home, watching the news on TV in peace, but suddenly FBI agents ring her door and ask her to follow them to the headquarters.
Angela Prophet?
Who wants to know? Please come with us to the headquarters. I hope I'm not going to regret this.
There she meets Dr. Saunders, some kind of weird scientist who seems to know things about Angie that she's even keeping secret from everyone. Her powers. What powers, you ask? You'll see. Anyway, it's made clear that lately the world is sick, and Angie seems to be the cure. And in the midst of these silly dialogues, it happens that...
In the name of the fallen and his prophet Aleister Croley!
Doctor, why?
How anticlimactic. Well, with the professor seemingly killed for no reasons, Angie finds herself having to reach his car in the parking lot in order to escape, and to do so, she'll have to rely on Max, a sort of hacker who will remotely assist her throughout the game.
Hi, Angie, it's Max. Did I hear shots fired?
Dr. Saunders is dead. He was just shot to death.
Damn it, how could this happen? Have you been brought up to speed on everything?
No,
I'll tell you, as soon as I took control of Angie, the game didn't seem that bad. At least for the first minutes. The environments are richly detailed. There's a physics engine that's a modified version of Evoc, and I even liked the revolver's reloading animation. I also appreciate this photocopier continuously printing the dead guy's face resting on its scanner. It's a cool touch which reminds me of a scene from a really old movie. Anyway, I recommend forgetting about the revolver and swapping it for the SP-23, which has a higher firing rate. We can carry up to 5 weapons, but for reasons we can only choose to change the first 3 slots, while the 4th and the 5th are occupied by the Tomva and the Stiser gun, which are almost useless and cannot be replaced. To pick up a weapon, we have to point it and press the number of the desired slot, or choose to exchange it with the one currently on hand. This game has a good assortment of weapons, but only a few are effective and fun to use, as I'll show you later. Psychotoxic is a pretty hard game, and just on normal, here called I'm already a big girl, and she can be killed very easily, and medkits are often scarce. Sometimes I was even tempted to lower it, but I resisted. I mean, it's okay to die often in video games, but having to endure this death animation every time is a freaking pain. One of the biggest annoyances of the whole game right from the start is that you can get stuck on anything, be it a box or even a damn book. Not to mention the times when Angie has to jump over simple steps, or crouch to fit through simple openings, because it looks like she's banging her head. In all this, I have to say that the game has actually a huge number of moving objects for its time. We cannot pick anything up or interact with them like in the later Half-Life 2, but still it's quite impressive. Just look at this collapsing billboard, or these giant dominoes. Wow, this is a real flex, even if it doesn't bring any gameplay advantage. I think the ragdoll system deserves a mention too. Enemies often die in awkward and funny poses. Another issue is Angie's moving speed. She's quite slow, but I've discovered how much faster is the strafe running. Now this is the right pace the game should have, and I also noticed that enemies have a harder time hitting you this way. The enemy eye is the usual crap I've seen many times. They often show instant reflexes, and the ability to spot you from a mile away. Granted that Angie actually has a face that catches the attention of a blind person. It can also happen that they just stand still like idiots, or that they assume prone positions, in which they appear dead, but in reality they're aiming at us. That's annoying. At the beginning of the game, Max has a line that is prophetic.
But be careful. I think there are people out there that want to kill you.
I swear everyone wants to kill Angie. Cops, FBI, the army, gangsters, whatever those guys are, and an Afro guy with the stereo.
Up, get it, shake a little something.
What the heck? And then there's this silly guy on a horse who, well, he just stands there doing this. Okay. Seriously, in this game, NPCs who don't want to kill Angie are very, very rare. Anyway, the game story unravels little by little, and it's quite a clusterfuck. A constant journey in search of people who should explain to Angie the origin of her powers and what's happening to the world that she's supposed to solve. If you follow the game, you'll encounter some very weird plot twists, but if you read the manual, you'll get spoilers for everything, except just the ending, perhaps. I did, and I was shocked. Not because of the story, which is pretty trashy, but because of this stupid choice. Seriously, who the fuck thought this was a good idea? So, regarding Angie's infamous powers, let's say that they're divided into two types. First, those used during gameplay, which are basically collectible power-ups. We have the classic bullet time, shield, invisibility, and healing. The names speak for themselves, but they are not very fun to use. Bullet time is good for quick attacks before enemies spot you, but it has a strange blurry effect that just annoys me. Shield nullifies damage, but consumes its energy too fast. Healing instead can be a lifesaver when you cannot find medikits. And finally, invisibility is potentially useful, but it's quite rare. There's a mandatory stealth section where this power is conveniently placed there to be used wisely. The problem with these powers is that they're not like those from Requiem Avenging Angel, which are always selectable and consume the protagonist's energy. Instead, Angie's powers are collected like a common medkit and placed in the dedicated slot, and if you already possess one and pick up another or even the same, this will simply be replaced. By pressing the letter C by default, we'll activate it and consume its energy, until we'll press it again or consume it completely. It's overall a simplistic and somewhat limited system, I'd say a real waste of potential. And then there are the other powers, that serve as plot devices for the story. In short, Angie can enter people's minds to find answers or informations. The game practically becomes Psychonauts. The so-called dream stages are a selling point of the game. They can be very bizarre, even surreal, but also macabre and horrific. The first time, Angie enters the mind of a sleeping guard to get a security code. This guy must be taking sleeping pills to sleep so soundly, and what a twisted mind he has. Believe me, this isn't even the most absurd dream stage, and after a few obstacles and tedious platforming, we even meet the game's main villain, Aleister Croley, an old fogey who believes himself to be the reincarnation of the Satanist Aleister Crowley. Okay. The next part of this dream sequence is even stranger, set in a sort of cyberpunk place with enemies armed with futuristic weapons, and what the heck are these monstrous mouths on the walls? Anyway, it's a nice touch that the dream stages feature a different set of weapons. To start, there's this pistol with infinite ammo, which will be our primary weapon. Then there are others, like the cybernetic eye, that shoots laser beams, which cause cool skull-shaped explosions, and the sniper rifle made of chitin, that actually fires insects with a deadly stinger. That's what the manual says. So, the game alternates levels set in urban environments, and these wacky journeys through people's minds. Throughout the story, we'll also have to satisfy objectives, which are generally limited to get to this or that place, and sometimes they even ask for things like disable the alarm, or find the escape pod before the plane crashes. There's this level set in Central Park, where we'll have to go back and forth looking for an important character, who leaves messages around saying, this place is no longer safe, let's meet in that other place instead. Yes, it's a pain, but somehow I liked the joke. And later, his dream level is a freaking medieval village, where we'll have to destroy clocks within a time limit. That has been very cool. Psychotoxic certainly didn't lack variety. The levels are mostly linear, but sometimes there's still a decent level design, and the rest of the dream levels are very cool. Just saying, there's a very wacky one that looks inspired by the Looney Tunes, starring rabbits, but it's very short. There's even one that feels like a survival horror, featuring the so-called Psycho Killer, who is immortal and chases Angie in every place she enters, by teleporting into them. Another one starts with a descent into the abyss wearing a diving suit, and later enter a wreck with an octopus wrapped around it. Once inside, I found the flamethrower, but it wasn't that great of a weapon. It's quite weak compared to the others. A real disappointment. Another very weird one is this set in this battlefield, featuring enemies like zombie soldiers and Nazi-looking cows, armed with the other machine gun, which we can actually pick up and use, but the accuracy is terrible, and it's overall ineffective. Another disappointment. You know what's cooler instead? The pitbull trap. If enemies are nearby, it will sniff them and follow them to explode in their faces. Good boy. Alright, I was forgetting about the normal weapons. Well, let's just say they're not that terrible, but once we get our hands on the Panda MP gun, we'll stop worrying about the rest, because it's very accurate and powerful. We'll end up using the rest of the arsenal when we run out of its ammo, or just to experiment. During the first levels, we'll mainly use the SP-23 and the Ingram Mach-10, which consumes its bullets very fast. The shotgun is interesting and powerful, but it sucks at range, and it seems like the pellets don't hit enemies when they should. One mechanic that would have been very useful, but is poorly implemented, is the ability to lean out to shoot from corners, but instead you cannot fire at all. It's only useful for spying on enemies, since it's like the camera isn't part of Angie's model. Psychotoxic is not a long game, it lasts about 8 hours, and it's a very trash adventure full of cheesy dialogue and surreal situations, like this part where Angie reaches her aunt, kills a bunch of enemies in front of her door, and later this woman comes out and greets her niece as if nothing had happened.
Hello, Aunt Julie.
I'm so happy that you're here. Is everything all right?
Yes, but I've gotten into something. I'm being followed, hunted.
This old lady must be deaf. Well, eventually the game ends. The final battle was actually fun, at least for me, and the final revelations towards the end and the ending per se were utterly strange. So, credits roll, and damn if it hasn't been a janky ride like few others. You know what? This is one of those times where I even ask myself why I don't even spoil the worst bullshit and just remain vague. As if there was a chance that any of you might ever play the weirdest stuff I cover like in this case. I've never been a fan of those kind of reviews that are practically commented walkthroughs, and I like to imagine that someone, somewhere, may be intrigued in playing even the strangest games I cover, as if he had read an old review in a magazine. Dedicated to my beloved daughter, Leona Mari. That's sweet, and I wonder how proud she must be. Oh well. We all know that Psychotoxic is far from being a renowned classic. On the contrary, this game has been severely panned by critics back then. It was a critical disaster, with a very low average rating score as a result. As I said, this game has a curious story behind its development that I will try to summarize, avoiding poorly repeating what has already been said by others more qualified. I will take as a reference this 3-part article from 2010, taken from the German Making Game magazine, written by the game director himself. Psychotoxic was the dream project of Frank Fitzner, who began imagining his ideal game after his groundbreaking first experience with the original Doom. The pre-production started in 1998, and his idea was to create a game featuring a strong heroine, similar to Grace Jones, who would battle an antagonist intent on awakening the 4th Horseman of the Apocalypse. And since the very beginning, the idea was that she would have the ability to enter people's minds and access dream levels. During 1999, Fitzner created the levels for the Vision engine under Vulpin, which he used as a presentation for future publishers. In the year 2000, he got in touch with CDV, a company that was funding many projects in Germany and showed interest in his game. And that same year, Fitzner also founded his development studio, Nuclear Vision. In his initial calculation, he estimated he needed a team of 11 people, 2.8 million German marks, and 18 months of development time, but CDV instead offered only 1.5 million. This led to the cutting of various features, such as multiplayer, some of Angie's powers, and the reduction of the core team to only 6 people and occasional freelancers. Full production began in 2001, after the first major payment from CTV, and by that point Angie's design had already changed significantly from the original, increasingly resembling the final version we know today. However, if you look closely, you can notice that all versions retained one major trait. Anyway, funding too many projects led CTV into financial difficulties, and suddenly they even stopped funding Nuclear Vision, which then looked for a new publisher to finance the game. And since all the milestones had been reached and the game was almost complete, Nuclear Vision bought itself out of its contract with CTV for €50,000 after lengthy legal negotiations. Then months passed. They ran out of money and almost went bankrupt, but finally a new publisher showed up, Vivis, which seemed to have good intentions, but forced the inclusion of Star Force, which later caused various serious problems. Anyway, in September 2004, Psychotoxic finally hit the shelves. It seemed like a miracle, but unfortunately it was released alongside another important game which literally overshadowed it: Doom 3. Fitzner himself recounts how sad it was to see only a few copies of Psychotoxic distributed in stores, alongside the huge pile of Doom 3, as shown in this picture. In December, they even agreed to lower the price of the game to €30, but, unexpectedly, this triggered a clause that denied them a final payment from Vivis. What a nice Christmas present. Psychotoxic was then released in America in March 2005, through Whiplash Interactive, who however didn't have the budget and perhaps even the skills for a decent marketing, so they immediately went bankrupt and didn't send their third and final payment. We can say that Psychotoxic has been a terrible flop, and in 2009 Nuclear Vision completely dissolved, thus putting an end to this development story. Fitzner was a man with a vision and great ambition, but he had to deal with the unexpected, and Psychotoxic remains a great proof of determination and spirit to sacrifice, even if the people who worked on it are not particularly keen on talking about it enthusiastically. Or at least that's the impression you get from reading Zenget Zeidel's experience on ArtStation, where he even calls Psychotoxic the worst game he's ever worked on. His description of that development is very harsh and reveals just how hellish it was, listing the reasons for its failure. I said he was because in 2016 Frank Fitzner, he passed away. He certainly deserved more. And this was Psychotoxic, an ambitious game that underwent numerous cuts and revisions amidst a very turbulent development. Among the last things I haven't mentioned yet is that it has some nice and catchy music tracks, but also a less impressive English voice acting and bad audio mixing. Seriously, listening to the cutscenes was sometimes difficult. And luckily, thanks to the fixes, I managed to finish it without too much trouble and only had to endure a few crashes. That said, I hope you enjoyed the video and perhaps even inspired you to give it a try. After all, it's a quite interesting yet heavily flawed game that might still provide some fun. As always, a warm thanks to all viewers, and see you in the next... Oh wait, I have a little announcement. In the past few weeks I worked on bucolicinsights.com, the visually outdated official website dedicated to my channel. For now, it only shows my video reviews and other secondary things, but I will add something new from time to time, whenever I feel inspired. See you in the next entry.